Welcome to the Sales Lead Dog Podcast, hosted by CRM technology and sales process expert Christopher Smith, talking with sales leaders that have separated themselves from the rest of the pack. Listen to find out how the best of the best achieve success with their team and CRM technology. And remember, unless you are the lead dog, the view never changes.
Welcome to Sales Lead Dog. Today, I have joining us Dustin Ruge. Dustin, welcome to Sales Lead Dog.
Thanks, Chris. Pleasure to be here.
So Dustin is working with a variety of entities right now and as a sales leader and leveraging his expertise, including law leaders. Dustin, when you look back over your career, which has been a great career, check out his LinkedIn profile and you can see what I saw and why we invite him to the podcast. What are the three things that you think have really contributed to your success?
Well, if I were to nail down three, one would be being malleable within the marketplace. I didn't, like most people, I didn't set out to be a salesperson or go into sales. It was something that I discovered along the way and actually determined that I'd been involved with sales for a long time. So part of it was being open-minded. The second part of it was setting goals. Most successful people I've ever worked with were always goal setters. They knew what they wanted and they would do anything to achieve it. And then the third part of it is just being persistent in what you do. So if you're setting your goals, don't give up on it. Or if you have to reset your goals over time, that's fine too. But really, you have to determine what you want out of life and be proactive instead of reactive. And unfortunately, there's too many people today, I find it, especially in the business world today, that are reactive in their life. And as a result of that, they tend to have more problems than accomplishments. And I think that's usually where you can track that back to where the source of the problem is.
Yeah, I agree with that big time. Let's dive into, you didn't start out wanting to be in sales. Tell me about that.
Well, what was funny? When I look back, I was actually in sales for a long time, like most people are. I just didn't realize it at the time. When I first got started in sales, looking way back, I have to go back to my childhood, and just looking at things a little bit differently. And let me give you an example. I grew up in the Midwest, and a lot of my friends, including myself, had lawn services or mowed lawns, when we were younger as children. And so one of the things that I looked at it as, well, okay, if I go out, I got to do this different and do it better than everybody else is doing. So instead of just mowing lawns and making very minimal amount of money, what I determined was where people actually made money in lawn services, which was everything else but mowing the lawn, right? It's when everybody asks you to cut their trees or trim everything. And that's where you really make a lot of money. So we would go out and I would go out and underbid every lawn service out there, build up the service every year to get a number of accounts. We would basically make money off of all the ancillaries. And then at the end of the year, when I would go away to school, I would sell the service accounts to somebody else. So I had two flows of income. So one of the things I discovered a long time ago was I was really good at sales, at least insofar as understanding the mechanics of it and how to make that work. So it really started a long time ago. And every facet of things I'd done in my life had a sales aspect to it. And I'm also an avid reader and a writer. And one of the things I also discovered was when you look at the most accomplished sales or most accomplished people, especially in the technology world where I play in, almost all of them were phenomenal sales people. The Mark Cubans of the world, the founders of Google, Sergey and all these guys, they were really, really good salespeople. And when you look at the core of what they do, they wouldn't be successful without those skills.
Right. It's funny. I've been doing what I do for a very long time. And I started out, like a lot of people in my world, working with the big database platforms at the time, Oracle, and there were several that unless you've been in the business, their names faded out a long time ago. But what separated Oracle and why Oracle is who they are today is Larry Ellison's like the best salesperson out there. He knew how to sell and market. Whereas the other guys were really good at technology. They didn't know how to sell. They didn't know how to market. Yeah. And that's why Oracle is as big as they are. And the rest, nobody knows their name anymore.
Exactly. Yep. It's a perfect example. And you see that over and over again, that really sales is everywhere. And the most successful people have it in spades as a skill.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. Yeah. It's amazing. And so let's shift into goals a little bit. I'm a big believer in that as well. And, from my perspective, goals, you have to put that stake in the ground. And with sales, especially, I mean, that's how we're measured, right? So what's your philosophy around goal setting as a sales leader?
Yep. So first off, the fundamentals of goals are the same in no matter what aspect or career you're in. I published 5 books, and a number of them, almost every book, I talk about goal setting as a framework of success, because really you can't have one without the other. There are mechanics of goal setting as well, and there's statistics that I don't have them in front of me, but for example, when you look at the most successful people in the world, they almost a common frame for them is they had a goal and they went out and achieved it. And some had verbal goals, some had written goals. The people that had the written goals were far above, surpassed anybody else in accomplishments and what they did. So when I look at that from a sales management perspective or any other aspect of life, the first thing I teach people to do is when they set their goals is to write them down and just to look at them all the time. And let me give you a perfect example. When I wrote my first book, I wasn't an author, right? I was speaking at a lot of conferences and things of that nature. And people kept asking me, hey, do you have something to leave behind or things of that nature? And I liked writing, but I didn't know how to write a book. Well, the one thing I learned was applied what I already knew, which was write out a title of a book. And then what I did is I placed it right on my computer so it stared in front of me every day. And it was literally a goal screaming back at me, okay, here's what you need to accomplish. Don't ignore this. You can't get away from it. But it's no different than the principles I teach salespeople anyways, which is if you have daily goals, I always tell them, write them on your computer and look at them every day so they're staring back at you. Because right now, and especially in the digital world, it's so easy to get distracted by everything that's going to take you away from that. I mean, there's literally addictions now for younger children, or younger workforce people around social media, where they can literally lose track of time. You have to have goals pulling you back, and you have to be able to have them staring back at you in place all the time in order for you to make sure that you're focused and then you're, driven to achieve them.
No, I love that. Because I was going to almost tee up that way with my question, but I wanted to see where you go. And to me, it's all about writing those down.
Yeah.
If you don't have that stake in the ground, those written goals, and they're announced publicly, like this is what I'm going to do, your chances of hitting that are slim.
Right.
Because everything else is.
And even if you do hit it, what does it mean?
Yeah, exactly.
I often tell people psychologically, work your day on a whiteboard and cross off the things you complete, and then think about how you feel at the end of the day. Because I have a lot of people that I've worked with over the years where I met them and I'm like, they feel like they didn't accomplish anything when they actually did. But you have to remind yourself what you're trying to accomplish. And
Right.
there's those micro goals that you have to do every day. And
Yeah.
it's human nature of how we
Yeah,
react to it.
it really is. You have to have that sense of accomplishment and that you're moving forward. Is very important. And that's the part where, with the way that we like to do our goals here at Impeller is, we have we set our that long-term goal that we're putting out way in the future. But now, what are we going to do to actually achieve that goal? We need to connect execution to those goals of how we're actually going to get there. How do you do that as a sales leader? How do you drive that execution on, breaking it down to those micro goals, the things that you have to be doing every day to achieve that long-term goal?
Well, that's what a great sales leader does, Chris, is they're able to take that forward-looking destination and walk that back. And ultimately what it does is you have to get back to habits, and you have to get to the habits that are exercised every day. And for salespeople, it's really as simple as that. And one of the things I train salespeople on, especially through my books and when I work with them, is you have to know what those daily habits are that lead to that domino effect of you ultimately getting to your goal. They have to be defined. You have to know what they are, and you have to scratch them off. And let me give you an example. Last time I was carrying a bag, long time ago, right? There was a company I worked for. It was in technology, and I knew I walked back everything I had to do from a core KPI perspective every day in order to get to my objective. So I knew I wanted to make this amount of money and this objective presence club, everything. So when I walked that back, I filled out a daily checklist. And what I did was every day I would print off, or every month I would print off 30, put them on the end of my desk. And people would often ask me when I went through training, whatever, how many hours in a day do you work? And I go, I don't know. All I know is I have my goals every day and they have to be checked off. That thing has to go into the trash before my day ends. And some days it ended early at 2 or 3 o'clock. Some days it didn't end until 1 o'clock in the morning. But either way, it was driven around those goals and objectives, around those numbers that I knew I had to achieve in order to get to that level of success.
That's what it's all about. And, that I think that's a big struggle for a lot of leaders, is making that connection between the goals that were established and that execution that's driving those. KPIs, I think, is a big part of that, right? Where you need to understand your business well enough to know what are those numbers that really are driving things. Like, what are those leading indicators that I know if I'm hitting those, my lagging indicators, those numbers are going to be achieved. How do you, like, when you're working with your clients, how do you help them establish those numbers and figure out what are those numbers and connect all these different components together?
Yeah, and it really you have to break it down individually by each organization, what they're doing. The easiest way to do that commonly is by dissecting their most successful people and then trying to determine what are they doing. Now, every organization tries to do that, right? They try to amoeba their top performing people. I surprisingly, industry by industry, et cetera, I've always found kind of similar commonalities amongst all of them, but they all have different ways of executing and doing. So what I try to do is, first off, understand, what does success look like now and how are they doing it? Is it replicable? Is it scalable, right? Can you create a process out of what they're doing? And then what I do at that point is I document those processes down and then refine them, so that there's something that we can walk it all the way back to literally daily exercises of what they're doing. And one of the fundamental differences, Chris, when it comes to goal setting that I think a lot of people forget is, most salespeople will work to the expectations that they're hired to do. And that's not what successful salespeople do. So for example, if somebody's given a quota, every year you'll hear salespeople say, well, here's what I need to do to get to my quota. The most successful people I've ever worked with in my life were the people that said, I don't care what my quota is. In fact, many of them didn't even know. What they did know was the number they wanted to get to, and then how to break those numbers down to get back to that number. So what I help them do is, a lot of salespeople are not as organized and methodical to do this. So that's where a good sales leader can come in, is to say, okay, let me break this down into a process, numbers, sequences, so that we can ultimately determine what this is and then how to apply this to other individuals that otherwise, most of this sits in people's heads. You need to get it on papers. It's kind of the E-Myth, type methodology. I'm a big believer in that. I'm a big believer in processes, scalable solutions, and then making them malleable enough where you're not micromanaging, but rather you're macromanaging your salespeople into success.
Looking back at the young version of Dustin, just getting started in sales, how did you develop this methodology? Did you have a mentor, or, how'd this all come about?
I had mentors, but these were things I just developed myself so that I could get better at what I was doing. Maybe it was just the way I was wired. I'm not sure. But it was something that I found. I'm a big believer in scale process. I keep repeating myself, and my apologies on that one. But there's a reason why I keep repeating that is when I worked with companies, and the whole reason why I got into sales leadership to begin with was, how can I scale what I know, what I can do, and multiply that in a way where I'm more effective with people under me than me individually. And that's one of the biggest differences between salespeople and sales leaders. Sales leaders are the ones who can create and dynamically grow and scale, whereas sales performers are people that are really good at doing that themselves. And more often than not, where companies make mistakes are, they take their top performing salesperson who has different qualities, putting them in that sales leadership role and thinking they can do that, when in reality, many of them don't. And that's where the companies fail.
Yeah. How do you identify those people that have, what's your radar setting to
Yeah.
identify those people that can make that transition into leadership? Because it's a totally different paradigm from being a performer.
It's very hard to do. And that's my first book that I published, called The Successful Sales Manager, documented exactly that process of, how do I look for sales leaders as opposed to salespeople? What are the qualifications? What are the characteristics? What are the questions I ask? What do I look for? All of that I document in the book. in order to help them. Because again, that was a perfect example, right? A lot of the people in the company were saying, how are you getting so good at hiring these people? Well, the reality is I had a process for that, and I developed it, and I changed it over the years and made it better. But there is a defining characteristic around that. And this is where most companies fail to understand that, is they have senior executive leadership that looks at high performing salespeople and think that translates to high performing leadership. More often than not, unfortunately, it doesn't. And that's where they fail. So sales leaders are certain character traits that are similar but different. And I document those in my book, not to try to promote my book. I do
plug away. That's
I
why people are listening, right? Plug away.
Exactly. But I did document this in the book and keep it very simple so that if you're trying to find good sales leaders, what are those people and how do you find them?
Yeah. No, I think that's such a huge part of being a sales leader, is being able to build that pyramid of leadership behind you that, you can't do it all yourself. You have to have people that, you build a team and that can execute and help people achieve, right?
Right. Exactly.
What do you like to do, or how do you help people transition from salesperson into sales leader?
A lot of it has to do with mentoring. First off, you have to show them what to do. Unfortunately, the biggest problem with sales leadership is that most people don't get a degree in it. They don't have experience with it. There's no roadmap for it generally. That's, again, why I wrote my first book, because ultimately, the best sales leaders, if you hire the right person who has the right characteristics, they need to be mentored by the right people as well. And they have to know what those differences are and how to do things. So a lot of it has to be with taking the under the wings, having to follow processes, how to manage people, all of these things they've never been trained on. They didn't get degrees on it. So really mentoring is critical when it comes to not only training, but mentoring is critical, because you can train them all day. But as we know, the retention level, most training is condensed, and it is very little. And really sales leadership is something that is a journey, not a destination.
Right. Do you think most sales training programs out there are helpful, or do you think they're fluff?
I think they're all good and they're all fluff.
Okay.
The reason why I say that is I have some methodologies I really like in certain industries.
Right.
And I don't know if we're supposed to be talking about them by name. There's certain ones, for example, like in the enterprise sales world, that I do adhere to. But what I do is I create hybrids of those models to apply to the companies that we're using them for. And then you also notice that there's been an evolution of methodologies, but a lot of times it's an evolution of, in many respects, the same type of things.
Right.
And one of the concerns I've had over the years, not to disparage any of these companies because they're all really fantastic, is a number of them have their own goals, right, of what they want to sell and how they want to do it. And sometimes it can go too far where it's like, you have to sign up for this and all these expenses, when the reality is the fundamentals of what they train are not hard to understand. Many times you can grab it out of a book. But as a sales leader, what you need to do is, again, it's just like in normal sales. Sales is in the follow-up, right? So you can train them all day on any methodology you want. But the reality is, how do you apply that to the processes, procedures, and your leadership skills? That's really where sales training becomes successful, is not the implementation of the training, but rather the follow-up.
It's, as you're listening to, I'm like, man, there's so many parallels to my world, because we get asked all the time, like, oh, we need a new CRM. What's the best one out there? And it depends, and there is no silver bullet. There's no, magic button that we can press to say, here's your perfect CRM. Because honestly, most people spend more time focused on the technology than what's wrapped around the technology. That's what's really important. It's about people, processes, and data, and connecting this stuff, and that's what's really important, and
Right.
what's really going to determine your outcome. And so
I,
just
I
listening to you, I was just like, man,
well,
his
I
was very
agree.
much like mine.
And CRM is a whole nother bucket. It's I'm old enough to remember the days when there were only one or two major players in the
Right.
CRM space, and we all know who they were, and they were very hard to work with. They were terrible systems in my opinion.
Yeah.
And they were implemented largely not based upon productivity and integration, but rather by reporting and senior executive oversight. And because of that, it was a top-down rollout of these technologies and systems that nobody liked.
Right.
Even today, a lot of salespeople are reticent around these tools. The good news is the newer tools that are out there are actually developed by largely salespeople.
Right.
They're integrated, which is the key, especially with digital marketing now. One of the things that I do when I do CRM rollouts in organizations are, it's not just one system, but it's a number of different tech stack working together
Right.
that ultimately, when you present it that way, that is a productivity gainer for the salespeople.
Yeah.
They want to use it because if they don't, they end up losing out. It's not just a reporting up tool anymore, but an integrated solution suite for them to be successful. And that is where companies really can be successful, is if they roll out these types of tech stack suites correctly. If they do it correctly, then you can use multiple systems. They can be successful. If you don't and follow the old top-down methodology, you're going to continue to have the problems that everybody's had for a long time with CRM.
Right. Let's transition back a little bit to the sales side of things in terms of the top-down approach to selling. That, what's your perspective on, in terms of, I want to build out our sales organization and our sales process. Does top-down approach work?
Give me an example.
Like, for example, I mean, I'm no longer in the front line. I'm kind of disconnected from the day-to-day of what's really going on and of really trying to sell within our organization.
Right.
Who should be making those decisions around developing our sales process, or how should I be going about doing that as a sales leader?
Okay.
Because I am not necessarily on the front lines anymore.
Yep, it's a great question. So the first thing, and this is kind of a macro answer to that question, is a good sales organization or a bad one is defined by ultimately its leadership. They are the shadow of their leadership. I've seen great sales organizations that bring in toxic cultural people and destroy it. And I've seen the opposite. I've seen really impactful salespeople come in sales leaders come in, and then they shadow that throughout their organization. So if I was an organization right now where I'm trying to build a top flight sales organization, you always start with the leadership first, because you really have to set that tone for the organization, how they're going to interoperate. Now, the good news is there are salespeople that can be successful despite good or bad leadership, which is ultimately what you want to hire as well. I often tell people, when you get into sales leadership, you're going to become, if you're successful, you're going to become a very, very good sales recruiter. And if they don't understand that now, they need to understand that you're building a team. And if you think about any coach in any sport, the most important thing they do is they draft and they build teams and they put them together. And this is exactly what you need to do as well. Now, that's one of the things I often tell salespeople that move into these roles. I'm like, you have to be really good at doing this, because ultimately over time, really great sales leaders not only know how to identify really top flight salespeople, but in many cases, like myself and others, they have a book of people that they can pick up and call at any one time who are the top people they've ever worked with. They know who they are. And then, there's an old saying I like to use, which is, birds of a feather when it comes to successful salespeople. They often attract their own kind, right? If you bring in a really good salesperson, they like your culture, they like your leadership, they like the money they're making. Right. Then they're going to be referring other people just like them coming into your organization. All of a sudden, you're going to have a very high performance sales organization very fast.
That's interesting. That's really interesting that you took that answer in a direction I wasn't really anticipating, but that's very insightful. And I mean, anyone who plays sports and understand that there's a good analogy there. Like, hey, you can have a great coach that's an awesome tactician and knows the sport inside and out. But if they can't recruit and build a good team to execute, again, it always comes back to execution, right?
Right.
It doesn't matter if you're brilliant in understanding the sport if you can't build a team to execute.
Well, I often told people that one of my first Christmas gifts, names on my list of every gift I had, was always to my top recruiters.
Oh, yeah.
Because they are so critical to your success when you're working, either if you're sourcing or hopefully you're working with a really good recruiter outside.
Right. I mean, I think Tom Brady did a huge amount of recruiting to bring in people he knew were going to be good performers and complement what he was doing.
Yep.
That's why he was so successful.
I've not met one successful sales leader that has not been able to execute on that correctly.
Yeah. That's awesome. If I'm a sales leader, like I'm just young, I'm getting out in there, how do I build that network, or what are some of the ways I can develop those recruiting skills?
Yeah. So the first thing is hopefully, I'm a big believer in outside recruiting, not because I am one, I'm not. But I think a lot of companies fail where they use internal recruiters for sourcing, and they do a very poor job of that. First off, you should identify not only good salespeople, but also really, really good sales recruiters. You need to know who they are because they're the ones networked with all these people that you want to ultimately hire. So the first thing you should do is go out and start asking around who are the top sales recruiters, not companies, but the people, because they often move from company to company or they have their own systems or companies now. The first thing is start identifying who they are. So you can build your networks of people that are going to be able to recruit for you. Networking is also the other key. And this applies to any aspect in business, which is if you find successful people, one of the things I love to do when I go to trade shows within different businesses or whatever is, there's an old saying, which keep your enemies close and things of that nature. But what I do is instead of being adversarial to people in the same industry, I'll actually go up and talk to people and say, who are your top salespeople in your company? And I'll make notes of it and I'll make connections with them right away on LinkedIn, or I'll just introduce myself. I'll stay in touch with them. I might not be hiring them for months or even years, but over time, I'm building a bench of who are the top people in this industry. Who are they? How do I get in touch with them? And oftentimes they're right in front of you. And if you just look at where they are and what they're doing, they're often surprised when I would walk up and say, aren't you with this company you're helping? I'm like, yep, I'm just trying to meet the top people out there. And by the time I have openings, I will have benches of people ready to go. They already know who I am, which is also part of the sales process. And then it makes it very easy to become very successful fast. But again, that goes back to that recruiting aspect. If you're always recruiting all the time in sales, even especially when you don't have openings, because hopefully over time you're working for a company that's growing and you will have those openings, and then you'll have great people to fill them right away.
Yeah, that's the key, is the right away part. That if you don't have that bench, that library, that no one has a Rolodex anymore, but you don't have that list of these are the people I'm gonna call. It's you're struggling.
Yeah.
You have to have that list.
Yep.
Um, what are the things that, when you come into an organization, begin working with them, what are those things you're looking at for the first 90 days that you're working with them?
Well, first off, what you said is critical, which is looking, right? The first thing I learned a long time ago from mentors are, especially within the first 30, 60, 90 days, don't make any major changes. Because one is you have to immerse yourself in the company, the culture, all the dynamics of what's going on there. I've seen so many people make mistakes where they come in quick and make fast decisions and they blow things up. They just didn't understand where things were and what they're doing. So the first thing I do is when I come into organizations is I ask a flurry of questions. I'm getting to understand everything. I'm spending time with their top performers. I'm trying to understand why weren't people successful? Not who left, but why did they leave, and things of that nature. So I'm looking at core KPIs. I'm looking at coverage ratios. I'm looking at pipelines. I'm looking at all the numbers so that I can build that equation that you were talking about earlier, Chris, which is what does success look like for this company? And oftentimes companies don't really understand what those numbers are. And if they have ineffective sales leadership, they don't know how to take that pulse. And when you come in, you can do that very quickly. I can look at, for example, coverage ratios and see immediately, is this company healthy or not? Do they have the right amount of pipeline to be able to produce what they're doing? What are their close ratios? All part of that in those things. What are their turnover rates? What are their growth targets? It's not hard to do the math. I studied finance when I was in college, and it's the one time where I'm using numbers all the time, is because ultimately you manage what you can measure, right? And that's what I'm doing when I come into the organization. So asking a lot of questions, I'm building out the numbers, and I'm trying to define what success looks like so that they ultimately know how to execute on that. And it is a process, and you have to be methodical, but you also have to be patient, because there's a lot of things that you might not uncover initially, that if you make the wrong decision, you're going to uncover the wrong way.
I love what you said, what success looks like, because I'm shocked when I ask that question at our clients. They don't have an answer. It's
Right.
deer in the headlights look that you're getting back at you. Do you experience that a lot?
Yes. And sadly at the wrong levels in many cases. So,
Right,
and
right.
that's okay. I mean, a lot of senior executives that don't have sales experience don't know these things. And you have to have uncomfortable conversations with them. Oftentimes, part of that culture that I was talking about, That's why it's so critical, because you have to have an open door policy, not only figuratively, but literally with people. Because if you're working in an environment, and we all know what this is, everybody's had a bad leader or a bad executive or something, you can see that right away. And those are the environments I stay away from now, because immediately I know no matter what I tell them, it's not going to matter if they're not willing to listen and make those changes that are going to course correct. And even if I tell them what success is that what they want to hear? So, so part of that is setting those expectations in advance. And that's why I often tell people one of the most important things that you can do if you get into sales leadership, make sure you're going to be working for people you really, really respect and look up to, and make sure that the leaders that they're reporting to are all the same. Because if you have toxic in any part of that chain, it's going to precipitate down. Your life's going to be miserable.
Yeah, that's so true. My dad always told me, always be the third person in when there's major changes that need to be made, because the first person they're not going to listen to. Second person, it's going to fail just because they're not ready to make the changes, because usually they're big changes. And so they'll get so far, but they're going to fail. But the third person, they've been through enough pain now where they're like, hey, it's time now. We really have to commit to this and see it through.
That's great advice. Great advice. How many companies can suffer through that though?
Oh no, that's the hard part, right?
Right.
And like hopefully they're still around for the third person.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right, let's shift back to CRM. Do you love it or do you hate it?
I like it when it's done correctly. And the reason why is I look at CRM as a productivity tool. And if it's not productive to the sales organization first, it shouldn't be in place at all.
Amen.
And that's really how I look at it. And I know we talked about this before a moment ago, but there's certain things that I look at through there. The good news is there's a few in particular. I won't name them. We all kind of know who they are, but there's a few that if implemented correctly, if mapped correctly into sales processes and integrated into the marketing and the recording capabilities that are out there. There's some great vendors. So there's a lot of tech stack that I bring into organization time when I work with them, and it's across the board. And salespeople will oftentimes look at this and say, "I can't believe I did things without this." And that's what you want them to be able to say when you have to stay on top of them to say, "Are you updating your CRM system?" It's the first and final indication that you made a bad deployment of your sales or your CRM system. And it really comes down to that. I often tell people, if your salespeople hate your CRM system, it's the system's fault, not the salespeople, and stop writing them about it because you haven't implemented it correctly.
No, 100% agree. And it's when people come to us and say, hey, I need a new CRM, my first question is why?
Right.
What problems are you seeking to solve? What are you trying to achieve? And if like, oh, I need it to fix my sales process, I'm like, CRM is not going to do that. I've yet to see technology that can fix bad process. You've got to fix the process first. And if you're not doing that, if you're not taking that perspective, the technology is a tool. And if you're not using the tool correctly, it doesn't matter what else is going on. It's not going to help your business. And so if they're coming to me like that, I'm like, hey, we need to shift perspective here and change our perspective to be, how are we going to leverage this tool to create alignment towards our goals that we're trying to execute on, and without that alignment and it's a tool that's enabling the sales team. It's making it easier for them to do what they need to do to find prospects and really tone in on their ICPs. That's what it's there for. If it's about, hey, I need to know what my sales team is doing, there's other ways to do that, but let's not burden the sales team with something that it's becomes an anchor they're dragging behind them. It drives me crazy.
100%. And the worst thing about CRM is the larger the organization, the stickier the system becomes. So once it's launched, the first question you're going to get is, hey, we spend millions putting this in. We're never going to change this. And they keep digging a hole. And so you have to be careful when you come into those organizations to know what's there and why it's there, because oftentimes you can't move that tank.
No, you're looking at least 3 years before you can even start talking about it again. And that's a long time to suffer with a poorly implemented CRM.
Right. And the funny thing about it is all these capabilities, these tools I'm talking about are integrating or are innovating around these legacy tools.
Yeah,
And what they're finding is more and more of the salespeople are now using these tech stacks on their own
yeah,
outside of the environment, which defeats the whole purpose of having
yeah,
that single central client customer record. So
yeah.
companies are hurting themselves by not innovating around this.
No, it really is, and it's part of the ecosystem. CRM. I preach like CRM should be your central hub for your business. Everything is connecting through CRM because it's about the customer.
Right.
And so anything that's touching customer, it needs to drive through CRM. And and then if you do that, you're able to extend it not just for sales and marketing, but now I can extend it through the rest of the organization around all our core processes. All those times we're touching customer, that should all be driven through CRM. And CRM really becomes an incredible platform to drive that execution around strategic goals. Um, it's, what's your experience around supporting customer success or customer delivery, all those things that need to happen once the deal is won using CRM? Do you have any advice for people around that?
Well, I've seen multitude of different ways of doing this in and out of CRM. There's other systems that are client management fulfillment. It really kind of depends on the industry.
Right.
It's not really my expertise
Okay.
from the client success manager side. I usually let the account management teams handle those types of capabilities.
Yep.
However, the one thing I do reinforce through the technology is there should not be separation between the two. Similar to marketing and sales, there's historically been a separation of firewall where you can break those down really well now
Yep.
if you have an integrated technology suite. Same thing with a client customer management. So it has more to do, back to your point earlier, Chris, it has more to do with process than the technology. And if
Yep.
you put the process in place correctly, which is unique to each company to some degree, the technology should be able to support it. If it doesn't, you pick the wrong technology.
Yeah, I didn't ask that question very well. Really, what I was talking about is the handoff between sales and
Ah,
delivery. A lot of times that's a pain point for
yeah,
organizations.
yeah.
That's really where, and you actually answered my question. I just did I answered it I asked it very
No, you didn't.
poorly. Um, but that is, to me, that you have to have that as part of your plan, as part of your tech stack is the sales team is selling, but we have to deliver, right? And so you got to manage that handoff.
Right. And the only thing I would add to that, now that you further refined the question, is I've worked with organizations where that's almost a complete handoff, and I've worked with others where it was almost no handoff. The complete handoff is the easiest way to kill your company very fast because salespeople, in the end, especially in the enterprise world, they sell themselves first. They create that relationship, and somehow companies seem to think they can control costs by handing those relationships off to lower cost individuals. It never works. Ultimately, over time, it ends up killing your business. Your salespeople have to be integral into the strategy of those clients, depending upon the industry. But mostly that hard handoff where goodbye is
Yeah.
usually the easiest way. That's the first red flag I've ever seen when I walk into a company as far as how is your transition between your sales and account management. If it's a hard handoff, I know immediately there's a problem.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's another key component of CRM is me as a salesperson, because I am doing all that work to build that relationship. I want to know how the execution on delivery is happening. Are there any issues? Is there anything that's going to blindside me when I reach out to them again? Because I want to continue to sell to them.
Right.
And I need
There's
to
so
know
much
what's going on.
there's so much downstream, but more importantly, the leveraging of their contacts and relationships
Yeah.
and other for yeah. If you lose control over that, you're really cutting your face off or your nose off to spite your face.
Yeah. Yeah. I couldn't agree more. We're at our time here on Sales Lead Dog. Dustin, I really appreciate you coming on and talking with us. People want to reach out. They want to learn more about what you do and how you can help them. What's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, so I've got a website. It's dustinruge.com. They can go to my website. They can send me an email directly. My personal email is my first name dot last name, so dustin.ruge@gmail.com. Or just go to my website or send me a LinkedIn request. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn through my networks and be happy to connect with anybody that needs help.
Awesome. If you didn't catch any of that, that's okay. We have it all in our show notes. You can get that at impellercrm.com/sales lead dog, where you'll find not only this episode, but all the episodes, 100 plus now of Sales Lead Dog. So be sure to check that out. Be sure to check out Dustin and also check out his books. I think that'd be awesome. Dustin, again, thank you for coming on Sales Lead Dog, and welcome to the Sales Lead Dog Pack.
Very good. Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it.
As we end this discussion on Sales Lead Dog, be sure to subscribe to catch all our episodes. On social media, follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. Watch the videos on YouTube, and you can also find our episodes on our website at impellercrm.com/Sales Lead Dog. Sales Lead Dog is supported by Impeller CRM, delivering objectively better CRM for business, guaranteed.